Well, my winemaking experience started about 15 years ago. It actually started 25 years ago in college, where as a vegetable class project we tried pumpkin wine, and I didn't want to think about it for another 10 years until I started this job. But my winemaking, I'm a horticulturist by trade and a gardener just by hobby. And most gardeners, we like to try what we've grown, whether it's just eating it fresh or canning it, figuring out new recipes. I like to ferment mine. So I've fermented all kinds of things, but this is some of my produce from this year, and some of it actually did go into a bottle. But winemaking's been around for thousands of years. Probably about 5,000 to 6,000 BC is when it's been first documented, but probably 5,000 years before that is when the first wine was actually drunk, when somebody probably drank some fermented juice from some grapes that had been stored. But there's all kinds of ways to make wine, from very simple. You just need some juice, a little bit of sugar, and some kind of airtight container. And this is usually the country wine made with a balloon. So very simple. It can also be very complicated and as involved as you'd like it to be. So some setups almost look like a chemistry lab, which is where my title came from. The first class I took were measuring things and titrating things, and it hits me, this is why I took chemistry in high school. But my way of doing it is kind of in between. I'm kind of more of a laid back, not too detailed. So on the left was my first set of notes when I very first learned from a coworker, and I've since taken a few classes. So on the right are my notes that I use now, but I don't have the chemistry lab. I don't have all of the equipment. I have just very simple equipment that all pretty much fits into a bucket right here. So most of this I got for about $15 off of eBay, so it's not a lot that you have to invest in. Really you need just a bucket, a trash can works. I've got some air locks to keep the air out and a few things to measure with, but otherwise it's really pretty simple equipment that's easy to come by. I do use some testing equipment. On the right are items to first kill the yeast and then get the yeast going and then kill it off again. And then I also do a little bit of testing to see what the acidity is and the sugar content, but that's really all the chemistry that I put into it. It can be much more complicated. But one thing that's very important is to start with good fresh fruit. Don't do the scratch and dent from the back of the grocery store, because any of those funny bumps or bruises or rotten parts will also show up in your wine. So use good, fresh, flavorful fruit. It can come from the farmer's market, what you grow. And then what I do is somehow I extract the flavor from the fruit. So here is strawberry wine that I made this summer, and what I did was just kind of mush it up, and it's in my 7-gallon bucket here, and I usually sit it in there for about a week, kill off the native yeast for a couple days, and then add some sugar and regular wine yeast, and then after about a week, I put it into a secondary fermenter. I take out the pulp, I measure the sugar, and then it goes into these. I have the glass bottles. I really like using the plastic water bottles. They're much more easier to handle than the glass ones. But again, this is about the only other chemistry that I do is I measure the sugar to start with. This is a hydrometer, and it'll tell me how much sugar I have in there and what the potential alcohol is, and so that tells me how much more sugar I need to get it to be a wine level. And then once about maybe 6 weeks or so after it stops bubbling in that primary or secondary fermenter, I rack it off into another clean one, and I leave all the lees or the gunk in the bottom behind, and probably leave it in there for another 2 months or so. And you can do this over and over until it clarifies. But again, this is my strawberry here on the left, and you can see kind of the gunk in the bottom, and then I just siphon it out into another one. And it's pretty much done when it's done bubbling, and it's clear when you can shine a light from one end and see it through the other end. And then I go to bottle it. Usually I'll kill off the yeast about a week before so it stops fermenting and you don't have that yeasty taste, and then I stick it in about any bottle I can find. And then you're supposed to leave it there for 6 months to a year to age and develop the flavors. Usually I'm not that patient, so. But then I also, sometimes it tastes a little funky. I'll make some jelly, so I've got huckleberry jelly there in the back. But I've also started fermenting tea. So if you've heard of the kombucha tea, if you want to do some fermenting but don't want the alcohol part of it, the tea is really easy and much less complicated to do, even more so. But like I said, fresh produce. This is some of what I had this summer. Peaches, I do a lot of. Huckleberries I got from one of my coworkers, and they were a pain to process. I've done beet wine because I thought it would look pretty, but it actually ended up tasting pretty good. I've done pineapple wine. I have a cousin in Minnesota that he's gone beyond that, and he did lilac wine 2 years ago. And he said it tasted pretty good, but it was a lot of trouble picking all the flowers off. Last year he did crabapple. And one of these springs, when we have a good weedy year, I'm pulling out my great-grandma's dandelion wine recipe to try. But there's lots of good resources. My first class the book was this winemaking as a hobby book on the right by Penn State University. And I really like this Jack Keller winemaking website at the bottom. He's the one that has the lilac recipe and all kinds of really good information. But mostly, if you want to try it, don't be intimidated. Just have a good time. If it doesn't turn out right the first time, just put the cork back in the bottle, stick it on the shelf for another year, let it process, and try it again. And if it still doesn't taste good, put the cork back and let it sit and age another year.